A very warm welcome to you. Thank you for making it to join us on The Probe tonight here on the JoyNews channel. We're also live on Joy 99.7 FM, Love 99.5 FM in Kumasi, and on Joy Prime as well. Now, the West African Examination Council traces its history back to the year 1952 after the governments of what was then the Gold Coast, now Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia enacted the West African Examinations Council ordinances in 1951. In 2006, the Wassce, as we now have it, came to replace the SSSCE. This version of the terminal exam at the secondary level, just like others before it, has been bedeviled with leakages and all manner of conspiracies, even by schools and staff of educational institutions from day one. Till today, the age-old problem of exam leakages, especially at the senior high school level, continues unabated. The question is, have we established a culture of cheating and dishonesty in exams? What are the systemic issues that need to be addressed to maintain the integrity of our examinations? Has WAEC, has its monopoly over the secondary school examination space made it complacent? Does WAEC need competition in order to sit up? And how exactly do we sanitize our examination space? We probe these and other matters tonight as we address the age-old problem of Wassce exam leakages while mapping a practical way out of this educational nightmare. We bring you all of this and introduce our guests right after the break. Do stay.
My name is Kojo Yankson. Let me tell you how to turn back time. You can now bring back all the fun, all the excitement, all the controversy of the Super Morning Show and all your favorite Joy shows when you go to myjoyonline.com/podcasts. Just select your favorite show and bring it all back again. Joy 99.7 FM, radio for discerning listeners.
It's radio, Joy 99.7.
Thank you for staying on The Probe. Now, tonight we engage our guests, and we will have some of them in the studio. In fact, one of our guests in the studio, the PRO of, in fact, the Ministry of Education. He joins us in the studio. Kwesi Kwating is his name. Now, joining us also on this conversation will be Peter Anti, Executive Director for the Institute for Education Studies, IFEST. There also is Kofi Asare, who is with Africa Education Watch, the Executive Director there. We'll also be joined by the Member of Parliament for Akachi North, Peter Nortsu-Kotoe. He also is ranking member on the Education Committee of Parliament. All of them join the conversation tonight. But I'll start with you, Kofi Asare. And once more, gentlemen, a very good evening to you. Thank you for joining the conversation.
Hello, good evening, and good evening to the audience and my co-panelists.
Right.
Good evening.
Great. Good to know that we can hear all of you from where you are. Now, Kofi, the bit is, this is a perennial problem, and that is why we are seated here tonight to address this age-old problem. But this recent one is on the back of some investigations. You've been in the thick of things. You have joined groups on WhatsApp, Telegram, and you've come out with some information that has even culminated in the arrest of one person on the page, from the page Jerusalem. What do you feel is at the root of this problem, which makes it so, pervasive? Since 2006, we've had the Wassce system come in, and it appears year on year, we go back to square one, exam leakages. What lies at the root of this problem, Kwesi?
Well, let me first indicate that the arrest of the Jerusalem guys was actually a collaboration between WAEC and then security officials. Jerusalem was not one of the platforms that we engaged the CID on.
Right.
But and let me also indicate that it is a good step, forward. We have been monitoring the conduct of Wassce for the second year running, and we've gained a little bit of experience in the dynamics of the examination leakage. The experience we have gained working on the ground on WhatsApp platforms, on Telegram platforms, doing Momo transactions, engaging with the question marketers in the past 2 years, I mean, in this year and last year, gives us a privileged understanding of how leakages occur. And we are not equivocal in pointing out that the leakages that we have been witnessing occurs at the depot. They occur at the depot. Depots are supposed to exist under WAEC. Because let me just give you one simple example. We have no disagreement with WAEC over the leakage of English and then elective maths. Or WAEC admits that it leaked. They use the word circulated on social media. Okay.
They don't particularly like the word leakage to be used in connection with the examinations.
Exactly. So circulating. And WAEC says that their investigation revealed that these two papers were circulated onto social media after the papers were opened in the exam room. Now, if you know how the exam system works, there's a depot. The depot serves about 1, 2, or 3 or 4 schools. So the headmasters or the assistant headmaster academic who is in charge of examination normally would go to the depot in the morning, pick up their question sack together with a police escort and then a WAEC officer, and then they move to the school. The earliest time a question paper is opened is about 45 minutes to the exam. That's the earliest, 45 minutes to an exam. The first exam is normally started at 8:30. It means the earliest time that the key will be used to open the question sack, and that key is held by a WAEC official. Only that WAEC official has access to the key and then to open the sack. This sack is open in the full glare of officials in the school, invigilators, including the headmaster and the headmaster academic. So the only time questions are opened for the first time is about 45 minutes to the examination. Now, in the case of elective maths, for instance, we got the questions around between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. And in the case of the English language, we got the question around 9:45 p.m.
All right.
So I will just restrict myself to these two, because these are the two papers that WAEC and us agree that the questions got out. Okay. So we have provided our evidence to the CID to track wherever the people who got the questions and sold them got them from. But what we know is that we got these questions before midnight. If we got these questions before midnight, and we got them because we paid for them, Okay. Now, if we got them before midnight, then it means that before midnight, every question bag must be in the safe custody of the WAEC depot. Because the only time the question sack leaves the WAEC depot is around 6:30 to 7 o'clock in the morning.
So the question
Before
is
midnight,
how... The question then, Kofi, is how you could have had access to it that early, even before the papers had been, dispatched to the schools or even arrived in the schools, some 45 minutes before the paper.
Exactly. Between 8 to 10 hours before the scheduled time for opening the question sack with the key. There's only one person holding. So as the question bag or the question sack sits at the depot, only one person has access to the key of the question sack, which is a WAEC official.
Right.
So if we are tracing the source of leaks, these are the leads that should guide us into finding out the source of the problem, alongside accosting people who, through their facilitation, obtain these questions and do business with them online and in schools.
Okay, so Kofi, right before we move on to our other guests, and for those of you watching, let me make it clear that you can send your messages to us across social media platforms. Share your concerns. We just might, share them right here on the Pro. But Kofi, so is that to say that fundamentally some officials of WAEC are culpable, and over the years it appears that the Examinations Council has been passing the buck?
I do not have the authority to pronounce culpability in such matters. But in my analysis of the source of the problem, the base of the problem tree, I get to the point where the only people in custody of papers that leak is WAEC. They are the only people who have lawful custody of papers. At the time questions are leaked, they are the only lawful authority that have custody of the papers. So whether the questions are leaking from the depots or they are leaking from maybe a print house somewhere, I don't know. But what we know is that the time the questions leaks are not times that the students are in the examination hall or question packs are being opened in any school. They are not times that any school has students in the exam room and exams about to begin. No. The latest one that we got, the physics one, that was the latest. It came at 4 a.m. Even that one, no school sits at 4 a.m. to write examination papers. For you to say that someone took shots of the papers, immediately they were opened 45 minutes prior to commencement of examination. It is just not possible.
Okay.
So it is only the security agencies that can do the investigations and establish whether there could be other sources, maybe from the printing house, probabilities from the printing house or any other sources that could be leaking the questions. But for us, our investigation points to the fact that the time questions leak is well before 12 midnight. And at that time, the question pack, the question sack is always in WAEC's depot with security over there. And the only person who has the key to the question sack is a WAEC official.
All right. Peter, very quickly on this one, your colleague, and I'm starting with you from the educational think tanks, because over the years you've seen, the things that have been happening. For you, what is at the very base of this systemic problem that we have? Is WAEC itself in this entire setup, is it a major part of the problem from where you sit?
All right, thank you very much. I believe we are limiting ourselves to leakages of examination questions. And if that is the case, it means that we are looking at examination malpractices that happened before the actual examination is written. Now, if that is the case, if you look at the literature, it gives you an indication the possible avenues by which questions leak before it is written. So we have the pre-examination period, we have the examination period, and we have the post-examination period. During all these times, a lot of malpractices happen, but leakage normally happens before the exams. Now, what are the areas that the literature talks about when you are talking about the pre-examination period? We are talking about the pre-examination period. You are looking at those who set the questions. So those who set the questions have access to the question before it even gets printed. Those who print the questions also have access to the questions before it even gets to the schools. Now, when the questions are printed, they are bagged and then transported. So during that particular process, there is the likelihood that somebody might get access to the question and leak it. Then you talk about the last point, which is the WAEC depot. So these are the various avenues that anybody who is into investigating this particular leakages might want to look at. And the literature is very succinct about this, that examiners, those who set the questions, those who print, especially the printing press that have been mandated to print the questions, because you see, at the printing press, a lot of people are there. There are those who pack them, those who package them, and all those things. And you might not want to, you might not be able to say whether they are all corporates or they are all saints and they will not engage in that. And then when they have finished and they are transporting it, you also have a possibility of it being leaked. And the last point is what my brother Kofi was referring to, that the depot is also an area that is highly possible for somebody to also leak the questions from. So this is what the literature says when it comes to pre-examination malpractices.
Let me just run this by you very quickly. We've had the likes of Dr. Okoboy suggest that WAEC has become a tin god, sort of, and that they need real checks and balances. We've had Dr. Smart, a research fellow at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, come to say that WAEC itself ought to be scrapped, something that we've had since, 1951, 1952, thereabouts, on the back of this perennial, leakage of exam questions and all of that. What are you in agreement with them? What is your take on that?
Hello?
Well, that is for you, Peter, if you can hear me. Peter Anti.
Hello?
So that question was directed at you.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. So very briefly.
I didn't get the last part of the question.
My point basically is that intellectuals, members of the academic community, some of them have come out to say that WAEC is behaving like a tin god because it has no competition. It doesn't have the right checks and balances. Others have said it should be scrapped. What is your quick take on that?
Yeah, all these are true, but then we will also have to look at other ways to deal with this issue, because of course, if you scrap WAEC and you bring in another examination body and you don't deal with the other areas that are responsible for the leakages of the questions and other examination malpractices, we will end up scrapping examination bodies every year. So we will need to look at this particular problem. And I've said that we have to look at this particular problem from all angles. It's a problem that have to be looked at from various angles, so that we'll be able to at least minimize the extent of the leakages. Examination leakages is like corruption, and you cannot eradicate it totally. But what you can do is to minimize it, and that is where we should be focusing on. All possible areas that we can look at in order to deal with this particular menace should be looked at, not just a particular problem. But I have to also add that WAEC indicated somewhere in March that they will be using some QR codes. I don't know whether they were they were deployed this way, and that is some of the reason why we think that they are becoming adamant and very complacent, and we need to crack the whip on them.
WAEC is becoming complacent. Now, later on the show, we'll be addressing some of the solutions that all of you are going to be proffering. But let me now bring in the Member of Parliament for Akachi North, who also is ranking member on the Education Committee of Parliament. Mr. Nortsu-Kotoe, thank you for joining the conversation, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good evening to my friend Kofi and Peter.
Right. If you could just up your voice a bit so we could hear you
okay,
better.
I will do so. Yeah.
Over the years, there's been a trajectory since the early 2000s when the Wassce exam took off, where there'll be leakages. WAEC will come out and say, oh, these are the reasons. Today it is supervisors. Tomorrow it is rogue social media groupings and all of that. We've heard this rhetoric year after year. Here we are in another year, and we have exam leakages, though WAEC would not, prefer to use that term. You have said that you would haul, in fact, WAEC to Parliament sometime in the coming week. When you look at all of these matters, where do you feel the problem really lies as far as WAEC is concerned? Is it WAEC itself? Is it the system it operates? What is it?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you rightly said, I said that we will haul the Minister for Education and WAEC before Parliament. As at last Friday, I filed an urgent question that on resumption of Parliament next month, the Minister for Education must appear before the House to answer a number of questions. Now, getting to the main issue, we have been observing leakages of examination questions for some time now.
Right.
And there are, let me say, the past 3-4 years, in fact, show that it is becoming rampant and a usual or a normal or perennial issue. And why WAEC is not doing much about it, we are at a loss. I remember quite recently when we met them at the budget session, we spoke to WAEC about the leakages. And they promised us that they were putting measures in place. So come this year, there will be no leakages. That they had carried out administrative investigations. So we advise that, okay, once you make administrative investigation, number one, make the report public. so that Ghanaians will know that this is the source, or these are the sources of leakages of examination questions. Then punish those who do that, or hand them over to the police for prosecution. If you treat the matter administratively, then you will realize that, or will conclude that they have compromised the integrity of the examination. So we were expecting them to do so, and they never did that. Only for this year, for the leakages to come out again. And as the other gentleman said, there are chains of a movement of question papers. Even those who set the questions, you may not know which of your questions will come. You know, they bring people together from on different subjects. So you also prepare yours, another also prepares something. Then there's a panel that will go through and select the final question. So at their level, it may not be possible that it is those who set the questions who leak it.
Right.
Now, the other thing is the printing house. I've been saying always that WAEC should have its own printing press so that they don't engage any third party to print question papers for them.
Right.
Because anybody who is mischievous can leave some information in the printing machine, and that could be a source of the leakages, and I believe so. Because if you pick papers that have been dropped in the printing house and you destroy them, what about the information that has been stored in the machine? It is possible that you can get leakages from that source. Then, those who handle the questions, packaging, they can also be a source of leakage. These are human beings. You know, these days of technology, before you realize somebody is hiding a secret camera somewhere, and as they are packing those things, it's flipping through the questions before you realize he or she has captured everything. Then, from the source and the depot, somebody is in charge. And from the depot to the center, the leakage can also happen there. So there are various sources through which this thing can happen. So I feel strongly that WAEC has not done its homework very well.
WAEC has not done its homework well.
Yes, its homework very well.
Okay.
Because if they have been naming and shaming those who are engaging in the malpractices, I'm sure by now they would have minimized. Because this is something which it will be difficult to completely do away with it, because there will be some elements.
To be fair, Mr. Nortsu-Kotoe, now we know that you made mention of the fact that within the last 3 or 4 years, this has become very rampant. But exam leakages have been with us way beyond 4 years, and they've been a persistent problem that we've had to face. But on this last bit that you speak of, that WAEC has not been punitive enough when it comes to, officials and maybe others that may be involved, we know that for a number of years, I mean, whenever there are leakages, WAEC tries to get to the bottom of the matter. And where it finds that there are people, whether educational institutions themselves or supervisors involved, there are punitive measures. So where would you say the blame lies when it comes to WAEC on that matter?
No, the issue is at the school level. What normally happens in the school is when they have distributed the question papers that you see some unscrupulous teachers going to make a copy of the paper and then go and solve the problems and pass it on to the students. So when those people are caught, but that is the final place, and that one is one of the malpractices. Yes, but how a whole question paper can go out 8 hours, 4 hours before the examination? That is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's quickly do this. We shall look at some of the questions you've been sending out to us. But before we get to that, let me just quickly come into the studio and engage Mr. Kwesi Kwarteng, who is PRO for the Ministry of Education. Kwesi, once more, thank you for actually joining the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, and a very good evening to you again.
How much of a problem, a worry, is this phenomenon of exam leakages to your ministry? Because, look, it appears we have a conveyor belt from SSS to our tertiary institutions. And if they are getting in there through illegal means, we can only forecast what that would mean for our nation as a whole moving forward. How much of a worry is all of this to the ministry?
It is a very worrying situation as soon as the conversation about leakage is coming. And then especially, let's look at even recently what happened when students had to prepare for their exams, i.e. the physics and the business management papers.
Right.
They went there and the communique was that students are no longer writing the exams paper because it's been rescheduled. And sadly enough, an explanation was not even offered in the first place. And so sometimes it gets very worrying that students will burn all the midnight candles, make all the necessary efforts and go there and get disappointed. But whilst we say that, we also try to also balance it with the intent and sometimes the motive behind such decisions, especially from bodies like WAEC. If you look at it, bottom line is that they wanted to, in all, protect the integrity of the exams that we are having. Because at the end, the question that we also have to ask ourselves is that if students were probably allowed to write such a paper and it came out that such a paper was already in the public domain and it was compromised, for me, I feel that would have been more detrimental to the integrity test that we are all crying for. But look, Benjamin, we really have to look at the problem from a very wider scope. If we talk about leakages, we all acknowledge that there's a very wide problem. But it should be put in a very proper perspective so that we also appreciate the enormity of the problem and how we address it. The first one is about the leakages even before the exams. I know there are individuals who may have their own vested interests. And of course, that's what the position of WAEC has been explaining. These are things that objectively we can all verify. So it's not left for WAEC to only come out with an explanation. But you have individuals who could just look based on the syllables and are able to make predictions. That, for instance, when I was in Konongo Odumase, I knew that biology, for instance, you should expect a question on osmosis. You should expect a question on the male or the female reproductive system. When it comes to chemistry, you should expect a question on titration.
So Kwesi, those ones are there. And every year you would have people making these speculations. But when they are spot on with some of the things to expect, whether they are mixed or not, and they are on social media pages and all of that, that is a whole different ballgame.
So I was coming there. I'm taking it step by step. And so that is one of the problems. So any person rogue individuals could just lie to students, keep them in the WhatsApp or Telegram page, and then promise them questions that do not exist. Of course, based on projections and other things. And most times, so when they put these questions on such platform, they labeled it. For instance, if you recall, last year, 2020 integrated science, it was all over that the questions had leaked. Yeah. But when students went to sit for the exams, it was entirely different from what we saw on social media. So most times, the bigger challenge is also in our inability to verify those purported questions that is flying over social media and then just oppose it with what had been written. That is one of the problems. Two, another problem is when students have opportunity to sit in the exam hall. For instance, an exam starts at 8:30 a.m. Around 8:40, you see a question flying on social media. Of course, that is exactly the same question that students are writing.
Right.
Most times you get, of course, students who may even be assisted by their teachers and take shots of the papers that they are writing. That also flies on social media. And again, that is also termed as a leakage. And then again, the problem about the leakage that we are all talking about, which, of course, Kofi mentioned something that, sometimes when the questions are within the confines of WAEC, it's only WAEC that has access that is with respect to the key to the questions. Right. It goes even beyond that. There's also a GES official because initially, if you recall, WAEC was using, the last time WAEC actually used a police depot to keep their papers was about 40 years ago. So right now, as part of the quality assurance system, now they keep it with the GES officer. So a GES officer will have a key and the WAEC officer will also have a key.
So both of them?
Yes, right. Both of them. But beyond that, students enter the exam hall and somebody could just take a shot again, we also do admit that there's a problem of general problem of leakages. I mean, even though WAEC has not come out to clearly state that the reasons for rescheduling, for instance, the phases and the business management papers were as a result of leakages. I mean, logically, a lot of people could draw such lines and inferences that, well, maybe you didn't do your homework well, that's why students have to suffer from this. And we at the ministry are very worried. But Benjamin, this is the problem. In any enterprise, in any activity, in any system where you have a lot of human interface dominating a larger aspect of the system, you are confronted with some of these challenges. I mean, WAEC has been in existence for now, and I will now not sit here and do the collateral damage for WAEC. But I mean, in terms of the credibility test, for instance, there's been a lot of gains there. Of course, we do have challenges. But for me, when there are challenges, we do not necessarily say scrap or run down the institution. I mean, if you recall, Nigeria attempted that and brought in a parallel examination body, the NECO. And today, there are still a lot of problems.
So we have to hear from, our viewers as well. But I'll just ask you this final question. Is WAEC a credible examinations body?
I would say WAEC is a credible examination body because, I mean, if you look at 1952 when it came into existence, recall the General Certificate Examination, the ordinary level, the A level, yes, that they were conducting it until
SSSC,
until they translated to Wassce. You see, the bigger problem, and that's what I earlier explained, that those times we also had these challenges, but this time around it has been more dominant and predominant because of the advent of social media, where you may see questions, speculations, and at the end of the day, the questions may not necessarily reflect. So
WAEC is failing to deal with the social media.
Exactly, that I agree.
Thank you. Now let's look at some of the questions you've been sharing, and all of us are concerned as a country because it also affects the quality that we are getting. Let's take a look at some of the questions that you've been sending via social media. Joseph Edu says, has the West African Examinations Council been negligent in ensuring the sanctity and integrity of the election? And what must the country do about it? So is it about the exam you're talking of rather than election? Nana Boahim says, does your panelists agree to the suggestions that the country must find an alternative examinations body to WAEC? That's Nana Boahim sending in that one. Isaac Darko says, have we got to the point where we say our exam is compromised and the integrity of the exams and the results can no longer be guaranteed? Interesting questions that are coming in. Stephanie says, which state or organization in the country must bear the responsibility of ensuring the integrity of the examination? And has the Ghana Education Service been sleeping on the job? Mariama shares with us, do you think the West African Examinations Council is doing enough to stem the tide and stop the leakages? Because for as long as I've been an old person, every year it happens. Every year. Okay. Now, Francis, this is a long one. I'll try to summarize it. Like, seriously, whose fault then? I think West African Examinations Council should be more proactive and productive in their dealings when it comes to examination-related activities. We are really joking in this country. We are not considering the kind of psychological trauma these students go through anytime a paper is cancelled. Okay, so I think that's the summary of that question. Let me come to you, Kofi. Do you feel WAEC needs that competition, like some people are suggesting, that the integrity of the exams are compromised every year, and WAEC needs some competition to sort of jumpstart its aggressiveness in stemming the tide of exam leakages? Do we need that? Very quickly on that point.
That I don't think WAEC is incredible. WAEC is, the fact that WAEC has challenged doesn't mean WAEC lacks credibility. So it's far from an issue of not being credible. It's an issue of not being responsible when you have to be responsible. Without responsibility, there cannot be any accountability in a democracy. Because the institutional
so what you're saying is WAEC is acting irresponsibly. Is that what you're saying? WAEC,
throughout the years, anytime there's a leakage, easily shifts blame to the schools.
Okay.
There's not one occasion, just one, where WAEC said that questions leaked from our source. It's always about the schools, all the reports, including last year and this year. So when questions leak before midnight, WAEC will say they leaked when schools opened their question packs. That is the dereliction of one's responsibility.
Okay.
Within a democracy, without responsibility, there can't be any accountability. But the institutional foundations WAEC sits on is that WAEC is, apart from being a monopoly, they are the judge, the lawyer, they sit in their own court and they judge their own case because they don't have a regulatory agency. So WAEC sets its own standards, enforces its own standards, gauges compliance. There is no sanction for non-compliance. Unlike what happens in other countries where there's a regulator for all agencies within the assessment space. Because of that, the report government will always take and swallow hook, line, and sinker, as has been the case over the past 20 years. And the very reason why we are still discussing this issue, which has now become the elephant in the room, is because our government in the past have always taken WAEC's version of the problem of the issue as gospel. And what is the version of WAEC? That questions always leak when they get to the schools.
So the Ministry of Education itself is also at fault?
No, the Ministry of Education, I don't believe in fault and blames, but the Ministry of Education has always, in the past 20 years, believed WAEC's gospel that question leakages occur when the question papers get to the schools. While in actual fact, it is not true. It has taken a CSO to come and investigate the process and identify that questions are leaking before midnight, and so it cannot be at the schools. If you get your diagnosis wrong, you cannot solve the problem. So the challenge is that because the institutional arrangement within the assessment sector is such that WAEC is the referee and the coach, okay, it is difficult for us to have an independent view of the challenges that WAEC is facing, including the issue of leakages. That is why this issue has not been accorded the right attention over the past years. Okay. And let me also add that WAEC cannot solve its problems itself, because WAEC is not the only person operating within the questions value chain. There is the Ghana Police Service involved in the value chain. There is the Ghana Education Service involved in the value chain. There is WAEC, and then there are other third parties who are co-opted to support in the processes. You've mentioned printers and all that. There are several actors within the chain. So it is not for WAEC alone to solve it, because WAEC alone will not even admit it, let alone solve it. It requires the initiative of an external agency like the Ministry of Education, who more or less has contracted WAEC to undertake examination on behalf of the people of Ghana. And that is why I say that it's all about fixing an incongruous governance arrangement where WAEC is under no direct regulation by any regulator who can say that these questions that you administered, this paper that you administered, on the basis of our investigations, did leak and fell below the standards expected of an examining body. That body does not exist here. And until we have that body, it will be challenging for us to all sit down and see our government take WAEC's explanation as gospel, when indeed
Kofi,
WAEC is not telling all of us the truth.
All right. So it's a very important point you make. We're going to take a bit of a break, but when we return, I'll be coming into the studio and putting that to Kwesi Kwarteng, who is here. He speaks for the Ministry of Education. We'll find out whether they've been patting WAEC on the back instead of maybe giving it a stroke of the cane where necessary. We'll be right back.